All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you to everyone out there. As always, it's been a very busy week or so, and I appreciate you guys very much. Whether you're listening to the show, whether you're watching it on YouTube, however you consume it, thank you very much. Also, big thank you to today's sponsor, Sunny Reds, 1841 Abbott Road, just down the way from Highmark Stadium. Before I get into today's show, I want to let you know Wednesday night live. I'm really excited about this one. If you watch the NFL draft round one, Tommy Parzamiso, the 16-year-old kid from Orchard Park, got to live out a dream of announcing the Buffalo Bills first round draft pick. This was done through Make-A-Wish. Really excited about this. Tommy is actually, and his mother and family are going to be joining me live Wednesday night at Imperial Pizza, 8 p.m. I'm going to sit down with Tommy. We're going to talk about his journey, some of the things that he's had to overcome, finding out about being able to go to Green Bay and announce the Bills pick. All kinds of fun stuff will be going on. So look for that Wednesday night, 8 p.m. live from Imperial Pizza with Tommy Parzamiso. As for today, a lot going on, and I'm joined for the first time in a hot minute, man. My good buddy over at Two in the Box, Chris Ostrander. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Too much. How are you, Pat?
Pretty good. It's been a crazy week, man. Really, really busy. I love the NFL draft time of year for a couple of reasons. Number one, I love the draft itself. Championships, just like in any other sport. You know, it's the same thing with hockey, basketball. You don't always realize it at the time, but titles are won and they're lost. You know what I mean? With players in the draft, the fortunes of franchises get changed. So I love it for that reason. And I also love it because it's just really busy. Like these last 5 or 6 days. And I don't know if it's because of talent. It's not because of talent or the guests or any of that. It's just people want to know about what's going on. It's been a really good time here at Talking Buffalo. I got Chris on today for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're going to talk some Sabres today, folks. It's been, like I said, it's been all foot on the pedal, all gas when it comes to the Bills in the NFL draft. Now that that's over, I at least want to spend some time getting back to the Buffalo Sabres, and Chris is an excellent resource for that. I'm going to get his thoughts on how to fix the Sabres. How do we end a never-ending 14-year drought? So I'm going to get some thoughts from him on that. We're going to talk some Buffalo Bills as well, including something that we didn't initially plan on, and that was Brandon Beane going on WGR 550 Monday morning and kind of unleashing on the boys, man. Jeremy White, Joe DiBiase, he had a lot to say. In fact, we're going to play a clip from that, him going off, kind of railing about people bitching over the Bills not taking or not doing enough to address wide receiver. So we'll get to that. But Chris, before we get going, yesterday I had Joe from Queens on, and he's on every Monday episode, and we talked Bills, and you know Joe does his rants, and kind of funny. I should play his rant, but I'm not going to, about wide receivers because he just went on and on forever. But I don't even know how it came up. At the very end of the show, we got into an argument over who is the better 80s, maybe very early 90s action movie star. Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I have no idea how it happened. I still don't. But before we can talk Bills, before we can talk Sabres, I got to ask you, man, what's your take on that? Who is the bigger star? Who's the better actor? Schwarzenegger or Stallone? Because this was a pretty passionate debate that ended up happening at the end of the show. What's your take on that? That's what I really want to know today.
I don't know if you can judge either of them on their acting skills.
That is true.
But for me, it's got to be Arnold. Growing up, my dad watched the Conan movies all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He thought he loved those movies, and then obviously Terminator. If we're going to early 90s, Terminator 2 comes into the picture, which I don't think you can top. And then, I like the Predator. I love movie.
Sure.
It's incredible. Total Recall is like campy, but good campy, I guess. Like it's so bad it's good. So I don't know. It's hard for me to get past Arnold. Those are some awesome movies. And then like Kindergarten Cop was like kind of a wholesome family movie. Came out the same year as Total Recall, funny enough, but
It
he
was a
got a
change
little
of
range.
direction. Yeah, and it was a change of direction for him too. After doing all these action movies, these big bad, either superhero, villain, or whatever. But yeah. So you're firmly on the team of your camp, Joe from Queens here. I'm on the polar end. I'll say this too. For me, it was easy because it's just a combination of two things. Number one, I just didn't love those movies that you said, and I know they're hugely popular. Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, Terminator. You mentioned all these: Predator, Running Man, Twins, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop. He wasn't for me. I love Sylvester Stallone, man. Come on, what are we doing here? Rocky 3 and 4, which are, look, I'll say this, they haven't aged well. Like some movies from the 80s and 90s, you still feel like they can fit in today's world. Those movies definitely can't. But still, Rocky 3 and 4, Rambo's 1 through 3, Cobra, Over the Top, which I forgot during my fight with. All right, I was having a couple of quick little technical difficulties here, but anyway, yeah. So firmly, Chris is on the team. He's Team Arnie. I'm Team Sly, but I lose that battle. I guess it's 2 against 1. So Chris and Joe win. Anyway, let's get into some actual meaningful stuff here on the show. Like I said, I'm kind of changing course a little bit. We're going to get to the Sabres shortly, but Brandon Beane going on WGR to me and sounding off pretty annoyed, both at the guys from WGR and a lot of fans. He hears the noise, people bitching, and he used that word a lot. In fact, he used the word bitching 4 times in this 1 minute and 5 clip or segment that I'm about to play for right now. In fact, let me play this right now. This is Jeremy White, or not Jeremy White. This is Brandon Beane talking to Jeremy White and Joe DiBiase on the air this morning at WGR.
No, it was. I was just listening to the last few minutes of your show before I came on, waiting on here.
All right.
Sounds like 2018 all over with you guys.
Well, how so?
Well, you guys were bitching in 2018 about Josh Allen. You guys wanted Josh Rosen, and now you guys are bitching that we don't have a receiver. I don't get it. Like, we just hold on, let me talk. We just scored 30 points in a row for 8 straight games. A year ago, I get you guys asking why we didn't have receivers, but I don't understand it now. You just saw us lead the league in points when you add all the postseason. No one scored more points than the Buffalo Bills, including the Super Bowl champions. So you just saw us do it without Stefon Diggs, same group. How is this group not better than last year's group? Our job is to score points and win games. Where do we need to get better? Defense. We did that. So I get it. You got to have a show and you got to have something to bitch about. But bitching about wide receiver is one of the dumbest arguments I've heard.
Okay.
So there that again. That's Brandon Beane on WGR 550 on Monday morning. I got thoughts. This is relatively new. This just happened recently. What are yours? What's your thoughts when you hear that?
I mean, I can't remember the last time I heard anyone from a team come on a show certainly of this in these parts come on a show that hot, that fast. I mean, he came Jeremy opened the segment and Beane was guns hot, right? That was, I mean, really unusual, I guess I would say. And Beane hasn't been shy about sharing his opinion on things. He had that kind of a semi rant a few years ago talking about just the region and defending the city. And, I think that everyone got real hot about that, on the good side, of course, but that stoked some conversation. When I was listening to it and I was like, I think he's coming from a point that I generally agree with. It was a thin wide receiver class. If they just took a wide receiver to take one, how much is that guy going to move the needle? Even if it was in the 2nd or 3rd round, I have some doubts about any of those guys in the draft really being a game breaker for him. I do think it's interesting that there were, and they kind of hinted at this. I don't know if Jeremy, I'd have to maybe listen back to it again because Jeremy did ask about it. He did ask, given how the board fell, would you have just taken one of the receivers had they fallen to you at a couple of your picks? Because when you look at the draft board, a few guys went right before the Bills picked in the middle rounds and
3rd round.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the 3rd round especially. Then there's 2 or 3 guys right there. So I think to a certain extent, it's I think it's reasonable to suggest that maybe the Bills had a couple of those guys on their list, kind of keeping an eye on them, and as the board fell, they went another direction. My issue though with Beane's approach, and I'm interested to hear your take on this too, Pat, but they entered last year with a really unproven wide receiver core, and again, he acknowledged it as he was talking with Jeremy and Joe. He kind of noted that it was a somewhat unproven group. But Mac Hollins was really outperformed, I think, almost anyone's expectations of him. Sure. Curtis Samuel got dinged up at the start of the season, so they really didn't even have him for the first half of the year. And so right now, I think if you look at their group, it was an underwhelming group last year, and I think it's relatively underwhelming again this year. I don't think that they're drastically more talented. I would probably push back on him with the contention that this year's group is significantly more talented than last year's group, when I think there's some really big question marks. You're effectively hoping to replace what Hollins did with either Kincaid or Palmer, and Palmer's probably the first or second candidate after Kincaid, but Hamler, Chenault, one of these guys they've been developing along the way. I think there are some justifiable questions to ask about the talent in the wide receiver room, and I was surprised that Beane was so hot and under the collar coming in, getting into that interview.
Couple of things, a lot to unpack, and I agree with a lot of what you just say. I think you brought up some really good points. And going back, let's start with Mac Hollins, actually, Chris, because I'll tell you right now, man, Mac Hollins, to me, significantly, you said it, he outperformed what his expectations were last year going in. And I would say if you could sign up right now for Josh Palmer to do what Mac Hollins did on the field last year, I think you would take that. I really do.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think you would definitely take that. I like Josh Palmer. Maybe he could be better than Mac Hollins was, but Mac Hollins, especially later in the season, was pretty damn good. Mac Hollins got forced into a big role early in the season, that Houston game, and he looked lost out there. It was almost kind of comical. Well, Mac Hollins rebounded from that game, and I thought he had a really good season. He was the best player on the field for the receivers, in the Chiefs game, in the AFC title game. He had that touchdown. He played great. So I would take Josh Palmer. I'll say this. It's fascinating because I understand. I really, truly, and I'm not taking a cop-out answer, man. I really think both sides are right. I think Brandon Beane does have a right to think that people bitching about the wide receiving room is kind of stupid. I could see his point of view, whether it's content creators like you and I, whether it's Jeremy or Joe on the air, whether it's just fans who follow the team. This offense last year was historically good. They really were. And they signed Josh Palmer. They lose Mac Hollins, and they haven't brought back, and they're probably not going to bring back Amari Cooper, who I think might just be washed up at this point. I truly do. But on the other hand, they're 4 deep at wide receiver right now, and only one of them, has really proven anything in this league. And I think that's Khalil Shakir, who's rewarded with a nice extension. So they're 4 deep. One of them is Keon Coleman, who I think's got a lot to prove this year. Coming back from that injury, he was not good last year. Brandon Beane, I guess this is the year where Brandon Beane's just going to say whatever the hell's on his mind, because I thought he was pretty outspoken about Brandon Beane about Keon Coleman a couple months ago. 3 catches for 22 yards in all 3 playoff games combined. That was Keon Coleman. He's got a lot to prove. So they got 4 guys, and if any of them go down, and one of them are going to go down, they're thin. They're real thin. Right now they got Shavers, Chenault, Hamler, Virgil, maybe that 7th rounder they just drafted, Caden Prather, who the hell knows. Going out to get a wide receiver is, to me, a smart idea. Brandon Beane was talking about, 30 touchdown reception or receiving, 30 rushing. He's right. This was an historically good offense, but is that sustainable? I don't know. Man. And by the way, to defend Jeremy a little bit too, a lot of what Jeremy does with the wide receiver train, a lot of that's tongue in cheek. He's been doing it now for a couple of years. I don't know. It's really fascinating, this Bills offensive thing. They're clearly counting on Keon Coleman to be better and Dalton Kincaid to be better. You're not going to go out. You're not going to trade. I don't think you trade in for Chris Olave or somebody like that, like some fans want. But I don't think it was unrealistic to say, you know what, third round, go get a wide receiver in the draft. Somebody who could step up. Elijah Moore. It's funny. Elijah Moore, Jordan Schultz from Fox Sports reports literally minutes after this too that Elijah Moore is coming for a visit. But do you agree? I mean, and you and I have talked about this before. I think the offense being sustainable ultimately is predicated on Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid improving their game this year. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, and I thought it was funny that Jeremy he probably held off or held back on it because I think he was really close to like making a Kincaid joke, like oh sure Kincaid, okay buddy, because when Beane mentioned Kincaid, Jeremy kind of scoffed a little bit. He's like, yeah, okay, but he kind of I think he held his water a bit. But I mean that was my first thought. I was like, okay, we're going to rely on this guy again. I mean, yeah, like. Okay, is he going to be healthy? Are you actually going to use him as the focal point of the offense? We've talked about this before, like you said, but I think, Allen is a cyborg, right? You have a freak of nature at quarterback. You have one of the three best players in the world on running your offense. So it's fair enough to say, yeah, we are going to rely on him. He's the engine that drives this thing. But they gambled on their talent last year. I think it'd be really foolish for Brandon Beane to say, no, we didn't gamble on the level of talent that we had in the room. There's no doubt in my mind that they gambled on the skill set, right? Everybody eats, no divas and all that silliness, and it paid off, right? They hit on it. Holland's overperformed, Allen MVP season, you name it, but they're effectively making the same bet this year. I think, there are a couple of circumstances that, may change the equation a bit, whether it be Kincaid improving, Coleman improving, but, is Palmer a noticeable upgrade over Holland's, maybe the biggest X factor within the receiver group itself. But to me, I look at it and I think they're making largely the same bet.
Sure.
And it, how successful the offense is gonna pay, it's gonna tell you if it paid off or not. So
Joe from Queens on the show yesterday and many weeks before that too, and a lot of fans, to be honest, it's not Joe on an island by himself. A lot of fans feel kind of the same way too. Josh Allen's great. He's an MVP. It's like, are you really doing everything you can to help make it easier on him? You know what I mean? Like you're putting everything you wanted to. I don't know that there's a player in the history of the Buffalo Bills that's ever had more on his shoulders than Josh Allen. Because if Josh Allen is just decent, if he's just decent, this offense is going to stink because there's just not enough guys who are going to bail you out. You know what I mean? Like, you take Joe Burrow, and Joe Burrow's one of the game's best quarterbacks. Look at the receivers he's got, okay? Between Chase and Higgins, and especially Chase, you don't have to make the best. So that guy's going to make you look good. You know what I mean? The Bills don't really have receivers, pass catchers that are going to make the quarterback look good if, he's not playing at his best. So there's a school of thought that, hey, you're kind of taking it for granted that you got the NFL MVP. You got arguably the best player in the NFL right now. Why are you not making the job easier for him? Why are you not going out and trading for a Chris Olave or a Jameson Williams, who was at least rumored to be on the block for the Detroit Lions, to kind of make his life a little bit easier? You're kind of taking these, I think at this point, mid to maybe a little bit above mid. Khalil Shakir's above mid, but like these mid receivers, and you're getting by with it. It worked last year. To your point, you're right. But don't let Brandon Beane fool you going into last year that, that he was perfectly fine with the receivers. He gave up a third-round pick for Amari Cooper. He gave up a third-round pick, and it didn't work out quite as much as they hoped. Not that Amari Cooper was terrible. There are a lot of circumstances. He got hurt, got traded midseason. My thought was you re-sign him. He has a full offseason, and he's probably going to be much better. Clearly, the Bills don't think that way. I mean, he's still unsigned around the league, too. So maybe the guy's just not, I hate using that word washed up. It sounds so mean, but maybe he is at that point. I also, though, back to Beane's points, and this is why I said it's kind of fascinating. I can understand his school of thought, too. You got Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid, two guys who were hurt last year. That is a factor. It does matter. Those guys were hurt. Keon Coleman did flash. I mean, that Tennessee and Seattle games back-to-back, that's the kind of guy you wanted. That's who the Bills wanted when they drafted him. And then he gets hurt, and he was not the same. He's young. He'll get stronger, hopefully mature. He'll learn better. Dalton Kincaid was good 2 years ago. Kind of stunk last year. Played with a bad knee. I mean, Dawson Knox took up for him after the season. and talked about that. And I like Josh Palmer. I think Josh Palmer is a good fit for this team. And he was kind of stuck, a little bit with the Chargers as that third or fourth guy. And, this will be a good opportunity for him. And then they are, Elijah Moore at least is visiting today. Do you have any real thoughts on Elijah Moore? I kind of feel like, he played with some really shitty quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I looked it up. Chris, before we went on the air, I looked this up because a lot of people are saying he sucks, which, by the way, he doesn't suck. He had 61 catches last year with the Browns, which would be second most on the Bills from anyone last year. Listen to this list of these are the quarterbacks he's played for that have started at least 2 games during his 4 years. Zach Wilson, Mike White, Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, PJ Walker, and Jameis Winston. You know what I mean? Like, you got the NFL MVP there. I kind of would give the benefit of the doubt. What do you think? They should add somebody, whether it's him or someone else, right?
Yeah, and it's what Beane did last year. He's talking his offense up on the radio, and he's conveniently leaving out the fact that he had to go get a receiver mid-season, right? And I think the offense improved after they did it. So Moore is an interesting one. I don't know enough about him to have a really strong opinion on it, but I think, just going off, 61 catches, like you said, it would be up there with this group as it is now. And I think when I look at the depth, especially, Coleman, Kincaid, Coleman, Shakir, and Samuel, probably the top 3 targets right now. And then you have Palmer mixing in there somehow, whether he's going to unseat Samuel or I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. But, with those 2 at the top, those 4 up there and at the top of the depth chart, I mean, like Shavers and Virgil, if nothing else, it gives you some more experience in the depth department, whether he makes a team or
Right.
even if he signs, of course. But assuming he signs, he might not make the team, but at the very least, it gives you a little bit more of an interesting depth battle when it comes down to those. Chenault down there as well. I left him out, but I think that's what's most fascinating about it to me. I don't know if he's going to unseat anyone above him, but yeah, I think I think certainly like Virgil, Shavers, and Chenault. I think there would be some question marks about what their real impact would be in the passing game. I think Moore's a little bit steadier than those 3.
Agreed 100%. I think, and Elijah Moore, by the way, he's got good speed. He separates off the line pretty well. He plays the slot a little more than half the time. He could also play outside. I think for the bottom of the depth chart, he'd be a good fit for the Bills. And you mentioned Curtis Samuel. I didn't even mention him. And shame on me because he could be more than just an afterthought. Let's not lose sight. And look, this is not excuse making for Brandon Beane at all. But injuries were just such a factor. We already talked about the Kincaid injury, the Keon injury. Samuel wasn't really healthy at all last season either until later in the season. And he started to open up and do some good things for the Bills. They paid him. I mean, he was identified as a pretty significant free agent signing at about 14 months ago or so. He's got some good football in him. We were talking about Carolina in 2020 under Joe Brady, where he had 1,000 yards before. I remember that when he signed. Don't sleep on him. But I still think they need to add to the room because you're one injury away from being really thin at receiver. And back to the point, even if you were to sign Moore, he's not really a downfield guy. He averaged like 8.8 yards per reception. Going back to the draft, I've tweeted this out, and I fully believe it to be true. The Bills were intending on taking Kyle Williams, a small, really fast wide receiver in round 3. And he went like 3 or 4 picks before that. They pivoted and they went with another defensive edge guy, Landon Jackson. And then in round 5, they had interest in Torrey Horton, and he went to Seattle, a handful of picks before the Bills pivoted and took the best player on their board, which was that the Jordan Hancock, the DB from Ohio State. They are lacking that down the field, straight up speed threat to take the top off a defense. And it don't look like they're going to get that this year. Before we take a break and get into the Sabres, what's your general thoughts now on the Bills offseason? We've already, said our 2 cents here with the receiving room and stuff like that. But just like generally speaking, because for the most part, this is going to be the roster that goes into the season. They have added a lot to the defense, a lot of resources, both in free agency and now especially the draft with their first 5 picks being defensive guys. What are your thoughts right now on where this team stands and what they've done this offseason?
I think it's all about beating the Chiefs, right? Everything they're doing, it's completely geared towards that. And even when they went and got Diggs, it was like, okay, how can the Bills take the next step? And they determined that it was a number one offensive threat, a target for the quarterback, and they went and got Diggs.
Mhm.
And now the Chiefs got completely dismantled by the Eagles' defensive line. And what do you know? The Bills look at 3 of their first 4 picks are D linemen.
Yeah.
And then obviously Harrison should help shore up the D backfield. So if that's the answer to in the room, if that's what they're looking at, saying like we got to get better on defense again, then that's let's see if put the cards down and see if you're going to win the hand. But I worry that they tried this once before already. They went and got Von Miller. They now I'm getting my years mixed up, but you had the Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa draft where you went, invested your top 2 picks in edge players.
Yeah.
I not to say that we've seen this movie already, but we've seen some of this play out in the past, and they just haven't had the juice to get past the Chiefs. Now, you have a different cast of characters. Obviously, some things have been moved around. So I'm eager to see how this all plays out. They got a million defensive linemen. I don't know how the hell they're going to figure out this depth on the D line.
Yeah.
But I'm encouraged that they shored up the interior. I think it should help Ed Oliver for sure.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about Daquan Jones being a little long in the tooth. This should help on that, that one technique playing on the nose a little bit. So I can't fault them. It's a copycat league, right? If you're going off what the Eagles did and that was the recipe for success, certainly the Bills defense wasn't good enough in that AFC championship. So, it felt like they were getting beat. They got beat at times, couldn't pressure the quarterback. So yeah, let's see if this is going to do the trick or not. It's just all about how they develop these guys now. It's in the coach's hands, I guess. But
and listen, you're not wrong too. We've seen this rodeo before. It's not our first rodeo. We're seeing the Bills really go kind of all in on defense, but you can't not do it because it didn't work before. Because you're not going to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs until you figure out a way to do it. And this roster wasn't going to do it. This defensive line with guys like Phillips and Jefferson, just not DeJuan Smoot, they weren't going to get it done. Not good enough. Guys, you need cornerbacks who can't run with these Chiefs receivers. Just not going to get. Rasul Douglas can't run with these Chiefs receivers. Kyrie Elam, he has speed, but he just not coverage ability. And we saw that he got exposed. You get what I'm saying here. Back to Brandon Beane's point, though, for people like point here for Beane, who are complaining that the Bills didn't invest more in receiver, which, look, they did sign Josh Palmer. To me, the riskiest one is going all the way back to free agency. It's Joey Bosa. What version of Joey Bosa are you going to get? Are you going to get the one from years ago? If he can stay healthy, that could be a difference maker in January, because this is all about January.
You're right.
This ain't about November. Then awesome. But if not, I'm a little bit still concerned, because you could draft a million guys. You got to get that guy who's done something in January, who could do something in January. But to the point, for people who are just complaining, like I just was 5 minutes ago, get Josh Allen more help. Don't make it so hard for him. We only get a certain amount of resources, especially in the draft. And, I went through these stats yesterday too. The defense was not good. This was not a good defense last year. They had some good plays, some good moments. They were great at takeaways. Like the Bills led the NFL in plus minus. But if you're not getting turnovers, this is not a good defense. Last year, they were 24th in pass defense, 16th in red zone, 18th in sacks, 11th in quarterback hurries. They were 28th in third down defense. Only the Cardinals, the Colts, the Falcons, and the Panthers were worse than the Bills at getting off the field on third down last year. That's the reason why you go and you trade up for a TJ Sanders to get pressure on the quarterback. And you draft a big fatso in Deion Walker, I say that affectionately, who could do some things. And when he gets healthy, Brandon Beane, who again is talking a lot lately, said he could have been a first-round pick if he had come out a year ago. The back injury. Maxwell Harrison could run like the wind. And maybe that's why they took him over Trey Amos or some of these other corners. it feels like this was done to match up with the Chiefs in January, even though there's a lot more than just the Chiefs, but it just feels that way. I got no issue. I got no issue with anything they did, with the exception of not getting a wide receiver in the draft. I keep coming back to that. I know they got one in the 7th round. They should have got one in the 2nd or 3rd round. Just a speed guy could really scare a defense. But all in all, what do you think about this roster now compared to, say, a year ago?
I feel pretty similarly about it. I thought, last year was supposed to be the step back year, right? And all they did was go win the division again, and quarterback won MVP. So I think they should easily hit 10 wins, and I think they should.
Yep.
They should be the odds-on favorite to win their division again. I don't think there's any reason they shouldn't win the AFC East. And it's gonna keep the QB healthy. Let him run the show, and I think if you can. There were times last year I would watch and I felt like they got really badly gashed on the ground, and none of the games really ever got out of hand on them. But there were times where I was like, man, they're getting killed in the run game.
Mm-hmm.
DeMar Hamlin's racking up tackles because he's tackling running backs, 9 yards downfield. But they managed to kind of paper over those cracks. And to your point about the turnovers, that covered up for a lot of their issues. So if this remade defensive line comes to play, they should be a pretty scary group. Plenty of question marks. You mentioned Bosa, and just the overall talent on the edge. I think is they're betting on some career seasons, maybe, for lack of a better term. But overall, like, they've certainly improved where they needed to improve. Interested to see how the safety position plays out, but Hairston, if he doesn't start, I think you should maybe put a little red flag up if he doesn't steal the starting job. But it'll be an interesting defense to watch. It's going to have some new faces in big spots, big positions.
Yeah, I think defensively, and for what it's worth, I think this roster is at least moderately more talented than it was a year or so ago. Guys who have higher ceilings, mostly obviously the rookies, and of course some of these veterans that they brought in as well. And this was also done, look, you want to win a Super Bowl, but this was also done with the future in mind as well. Because guys like you said, long into tooth earlier, Quan Jones, Trey White ain't going to be here for that long. AJ Epinesa, it's his final year of his contract. Joey Bosa is just a 1-year dude. They're the kind of, those guys they can move on from, and drafting some of these guys and signing some of these guys is kind of a step towards replacing them in the future as well. Anyway, take a quick break. Come back more with Chris Ostrander. All right, I am back here with Chris Ostrander, a hockey guy that I kind of forced to be a football guy when he comes on the show. He knows plenty about football, though, as well. Let's pivot here and get to what I originally, before this Brandon Beane stuff, wanted to spend the bulk of the show talking with you about, and we still will, but, maybe we'll deep dive into this more in future episodes as well. But it is the Buffalo Sabres. Let me ask you a question before we get into any offseason plans. Are you surprised right now that as we record this on Monday afternoon, Kevin Adams is still the general manager? There's been certainly some rumblings about Kevin Adams not getting fired, but maybe moving positions. But as things stand right now, anyway, Kevin Adams is still general manager. Are you surprised? And do you expect this to continue on into the offseason? As we record this.
I don't know if I would say surprised, because I certainly didn't think they'd fire him. I would have been surprised if they fired him. I thought a lot of what they did, not just the trade deadline, but the way that Pegula spoke, the fact that they won some games down the stretch, that some other players seemed to come alive as the season wound down. And there's reason to question that, don't get me wrong, but I do think, I would assume internally that Terry Pegula took some solace in that. And this is a point I made with you a little while back, but if you were hoping Kevin Adams was going to get fired, you almost would have wanted to root for some losses. Because I do think if they had stayed in the basement, if they finished like third last or something like that, then it would have been much more introspective when it came to looking at Adams' position. But they were successful in a sense down the stretch. They played better hockey. Jacob Bernard Docker looked pretty decent next to Owen Power, so they probably were like, hey, we figured something out for once. So I do wonder if they kind of looked at it like, okay, like some of the plan, we see some signs as to why the plan could work. I would question that, but overall, I think that'd be my take on it. And so, there's been some rumors, some rumblings, that they might move Kevin Adams up, almost like what they did in Seattle with Ron Francis and Jason Botterill, where Francis moved to president and then Botterill moved in the GM chair. I mean, Terry Pegula has been very, very, very staunchly against a president of hockey operations. And so I don't, would he break that mold to give Kevin Adams that title is a pretty good question. I kind of wonder if they almost would make Adams like president of pro personnel or like vice president of hockey operations, some nonsense title that's a promotion, but won't violate Terry's rule of no president, which is, again, it's silly, but and then Jason Karmanos would theoretically become the general manager, I guess. So we'll see if they do it. I mean, Pagula obviously is busy at the draft, hanging out in the draft room and, watching his investment, right? So, as is his right, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have been there, but, he's had other things on his plate. So, maybe this is the week that they meet with Adams. If they hadn't met with him already, I would assume like maybe on Wednesday they met, before the draft, and and Pagula can kind of take the weekend to figure out what he wants to do. So we'll see if they make any changes. The one thing I would say is like very curious to see if this were to happen, what is the dynamic? Because there have been teams that have done this where they promote their general manager effectively to save their assistant general manager, because they're a hot candidate for jobs.
Right. Yep.
So Vegas did it with McPhee and McCrimmon, but McCrimmon really runs the show. You don't hear from McPhee almost ever. But then in Vancouver, they hire this guy Patrick Alvin, is Swedish, one of like the first or most, one of the first European GMs hired in ages. But they hired Jim Rutherford as their president, and almost anytime you either hear them in a press conference or you hear people talking about a move the Vancouver Canucks might make, it's Rutherford is at the center of it. You almost never hear people talk about Alvin. So, Alvin kind of a figurehead general manager. So that's one other thing I always think about is what is the power dynamic between those two positions. So is it still Adams making the decisions, or is it going to be Karmanos really operating the roster building? So we'll see what happens with it. I'm not going to be broken up one way or the other, because I mean, at this point, it's kind of amazing that Adams is still employed. He's done very little to nothing to prove that he deserves another crack at this. So, if Karmanos, at least just a somewhat fresh face in the GM chair would be a welcome change. Whether or not it's a needle mover, who knows? But
I don't. So I definitely, I do not see Kevin Adams getting fired, and I think we all can agree on that. That's not happening. I don't even think at this point, realistically, that's even on the table. But if there's going to be a shift, if they're going to have some maneuvering going on, what's that timeline? Is it probably like this week? To your point, Terry Pegula has been, balls deep in the draft, as he should be. And this is the thing, when you own two different franchises, this was a significant part for the Buffalo Bills. He's been very involved in the draft process. Now that that's over and things settle down, maybe he is turning his attention. If something's going to happen, do you expect it to be like within this next week?
I would think so. Yeah. Now that the draft is behind him, he doesn't have too much to worry about from the Bills' perspective. This really, I feel like, really highlights some of the absurdity of how they structure their organizations. You think back to when Kim Pegula was president of both the Bills and Sabres, and now Pete Gwelly is president of both the Bills and Sabres. And, I'm scrolling Instagram on Thursday night, and when the Bills post comes up, and it's Pegula, Kim Pegula, and Matthew. And then the second picture is Laura Pegula and Gwelly. And I was thinking, I'm like, what if there was, a 5-alarm fire at the arena that they got to put out? Kevin Adams has got to get fired, or you got to fire the coach, or something crazy is going on that you got to handle with your hockey team. They're in the playoffs. Heaven forbid they make the playoffs. And you got a Sabres game going on the same night as the NFL draft. Like, what's Pete Gwelly doing? You know what I mean?
Right.
How is he doing both of these jobs? It's crazy to me. Like, I get, obviously you're only going to have one owner. That's fine. I get it. But it's just so crazy to me that they're asking someone like anyone. I mean, and Gwelly seems to be doing a really good job, wearing two hats, but you're asking a lot of him and some of these other executives when they got a double dip. so with that in mind, the fact that you had such a, it's one of the biggest, it's the tent pole of the NFL offseason, right? And so the Bills are also hoping to host the draft too. So I'm sure there's things also that Gwelly's trying to observe from a planning perspective too. Like he's got other stuff he's got to worry about. So I would assume now that that's behind them. If something's happening, it's this week. Whether it's early in the week, if we get an announcement today as we record this Monday, or if it's later on, it's TBD. But the chips are, the chess pieces, I should say, are moving in the NHL. Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh not coming back. That was announced Monday morning. John Tortorella he was fired in season, but or left in season. But Chris Drury was extended with the Rangers about a week and a half ago. So you're seeing some of the movement with these teams. The Seattle thing happened last week. So yeah, I think it falls within the timeline from the NHL offseason that this would be right around the right time to do it.
You mentioned Kevin Adams a few minutes ago. Probably the reason why he still has a job is because of how the Sabres finished the season. They definitely showed some signs near the end, and they improved. When it comes to the Sabres looking better at the end of the season, what does that mean to you, if anything? Is that something that you could really have a bunch of positive takeaways from? Or is that just a big old who gives a shit nothing burger? You got to do something in October, November, or this doesn't mean anything. Or again, do you see how they finish the season maybe as a positive sign for what's to come? Where do you land on how this team played near the end of the season, and if it actually means anything?
Yeah, I take very little away from it.
Yeah,
there have been a handful of these instances over the years, especially in this playoff drought. 2-3 years ago, it was, they finished pretty hot, and they moved up to ninth in the draft. Nothing really changed. And then the next year they came out flat. Even 22-23, that was a great year for them, right? They missed the playoffs by 1 point. They had their ups and downs, but they went on a nice run at the end of the year. And while they missed the playoff by 1 point, though, the whole idea was, we had a really good finish. We were in it. We played meaningful games. We're going to build on this. And then, of course, last year was terrible, or 2 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah.
And one I mentioned on Twitter not that long ago, 2013, the Sabres were not very good all throughout the 2013 season. I believe that was the year after. They had fired Ruff the year before, but if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, they finished pretty hot. And at one point, right around the trade deadline, they were like third, fourth last. The Colorado Avalanche, most notably, were like 2 or 3 points ahead of them. By the end of the year, the Sabres had gone on a run, quote unquote, a run, and they still picked they picked 7th or 8th that year. Those are they picked Rasmus Ristolainen. The Avalanche ended up bottoming out, and they ended up with Nate McKinnon in that draft. And the following year was 13-14, which was was the first tank year. So there's a lot of these times where it's like, hey, great spring. The Sabres looked really, really good. And then the next year they're terrible in October and they're out of the playoffs by Thanksgiving. To answer your question, though, there are some individual pieces to take away from it. Like Yuri Kulik played very well.
Yeah.
That's a positive sign. I mentioned Bernard Docker. There was some reason to believe maybe that he and Power could play together. I might get flamed for that one, but I think you could look at him and be like, okay, he adjusted pretty well. You might have a little something there. Obviously Tage and Dahlin, 2 other guys who they were good all year for the most part, but again, they were good. I look at it individually. There's if an individual is good at the end of the year, you can at least have some reason for positivity. But from a team perspective, it's where I kind of call bullshit. But
last thing I want to get out of you for today's is kind of a plan, so to speak, of what do you do this offseason to help fix the Sabres, to help make this team better on paper and play better together. That's going to end what is, an all-time embarrassing drought. We're right back with the Jets, the longest playoff drought, 14 years of any team in all the 4 professional sports. You don't necessarily need to give me player X specifically, but in terms of what you're looking to add, maybe what you're looking to trade, what you're looking to extend, what you would do if it was you making the call in terms of structure, front office, coaching, whatever you want to do. But what would be your general plan right now to quote unquote, we'll say, fix the Sabres and just end this nonsense?
Yeah, so it's certainly 2 defensemen to start, at least, and that includes trading Matthias Samuelsson. I got to get him out of there, whether it's trade or buyout, one way or the other. Get him off the roster, because even playing with Dahlin, and I know Adams mentioned that they liked what he did with Dahlin down the stretch. Like, Dahlin made Byram look good. He made Yoki Haru look good. He'd make you look good. So if there's very little to take away from Samuelson's play down the stretch, because Dahlin, he's the tide that raises all the boats.
Sure.
Samuelson's gone, and I'm bringing in at least one top 4 caliber right-handed defenseman. And the goal would be to play him with power. I think you can still upgrade over Bernard Docker as serviceable as he was with power. I think you can do better. The guy I talk about all the time is Zach Whitecloud in Vegas. He'd be like my number 1 target. But there's some other guys you can go around the league and look at that could probably fit in there too. I would love for them to find a partner for Dahlin too. I think that's a really big ask to try to go get 2 top 4 defensemen. If anything, I would probably survive with Byram playing next to Dahlin. I would just staple those 2 together and then figure out the bottom pairs with other additions. But I think they need 2 defensemen. Certainly one has to be a righty, possibly 2. But if based on kind of like the way I'm sketching it out, if I'm keeping Byram, trying to be a little realistic here, if I'm keeping Byram to play with Dahlin, I need to find a partner then for Bernard Docker on the 3rd pair, and it can't be Connor Clifton, and it certainly can't be Jacob Bryson. So probably looking for a solid 3rd pair lefty, and then a really good righty to play with power.
Let me ask you a question, Chris.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Before we go into fours, because I want to stop because I got a specific question about Byram. Again, you follow this team far closer than I do, and you know 10 times more than I do. But what I do know is when I'm watching the games, and I've seen a lot of charts with Byram that will show he's a lot better when he plays with Dahlin. And then when he plays with Power or whoever else, it's kind of like disastrous. Am I right by saying that? Because that's what with my naked eye, I've seen with charts. And if so, why is he not, like you said, you would staple Dahlin and Byram together? If that's the case, and Byram's been so much worse when he's not playing with him, why is Byram playing with anyone else except for Rasmus Dahlin?
It's a great question. I think probably part of it, they probably wanted to see some other guys with Dahlin, see what else they had, maybe even see what they really had in Byram, because he's restricted free agent with arb rights. So if they kept him with Dahlin all year and he finished with, let's just say he had 50 points, he's going to ask you for $9-10 million in arbitration, and he could probably have a pretty decent case to get it. And that's not a contract you want to give that player.
Okay.
I don't think he's worth it. I think he's probably more of a $7 million guy, maybe. So that's probably part of it. They probably were like, if we can get him away from Dahlin, we can see for ourselves, is this true? Is what we're seeing in the numbers is going to play out? And they also probably wanted to see, again, some, can Samuelsson do anything for us? Maybe we can raise Samuelson's stock a little bit. And I think there's probably a few different factors at play there. But my first guess would be that they wanted to see Byram, and if he can carry a pairing, if he can improve a partner. That's my read on it, is that they need to see, you're not giving him a great situation because Clifton has his warts, but we're going to put him with Connor Clifton. We'll see what he does with Clifton. I think that's probably a big part of what they were thinking.
Okay.
By putting him with him. That's my best guess.
Okay. Continue on. I didn't
No, for sure. No, it's an important question to ask, because Byram's got tools. He's a phenomenal player overall, like a toolsy skilled player. And that's what made him, even to me, like an attractive trade target. He hasn't hit the way that you would have wanted him to. And I would be very, very wary of him giving him any sort of a long-term contract. I think that, there's some big risk there.
Gotcha.
So that's something to keep in mind too. And the reason I said I would keep him, again, I'm just trying to be somewhat realistic, because if I may quote Brandon Beane, it's not fantasy hockey. So I can't just trade for 4 new defensemen and call it a realistic offseason, as much as I'd like them to do that.
Especially on a team where players don't really want to come here, and the NHL is just littered with no trade clauses.
Yes, and that makes it a lot harder.
Sure.
So the forward group's tricky. I'm going to hold on the forward group because the goaltending, I'm signing a veteran. They can't possibly go into the season with Luukkonen and Levi, as well as Levi's playing in Rochester. If I was GM, he's playing there next year. I'm sorry. That's how I would handle it.
Okay.
Jake Allen or Alex Lyon are probably my two top targets. And another guy to look at, I think, is Dave Rittich for you goalie nuts out there. I think Rittich is an interesting target as a free agent. But I think you got to get a veteran in there with Luukkonen, and they can split your starts a little bit more evenly and give Luukkonen a little bit more balance. So, and I just don't think, I mean, maybe they bring Reimer back. We'll see if Reimer chooses to, but I think he was inconsistent himself too. He had a really nice run at the end of the year, but I wouldn't invest too much in that. But at the forward group, it's really tough because if you look at their forwards, if you look at their depth chart, you go on like Puck PD and play with the GM tool. If they're fully healthy, they have like 14 forwards right now. So you've got to move a couple players out one way or the other. I think Jack Quinn is still, candidate number one to get traded. And if he can get you that defenseman that I'm trying to get, I wouldn't hesitate at all about putting him into a deal as part of a package. I think you can improve on him. But it's tough beyond that because, the fourth line alone, Lafferty, Krebs, is Greenway a fourth liner now? Is if Kulich is sticking around, it's really tricky. They're gonna have they almost have to make a couple really tough choices when it comes to who they want to re-sign, who they want to trade. But in a perfect world, they would get another top six talent. I think they need it somewhere. My hottest take right now, though, is that they don't need another center. I think Tage Thompson and Kulich as a pairing on the top line. Thompson impacts the game well enough that even though he's not playing center, he kind of gives you that first line center impact.
Sure.
And so you can conceivably get by with Kulich as his centerman, whether it's Benson or another player on the left wing, who knows? But then Josh Norris can be your second line center. So I think that helps them.
Sure.
So my take would be you get a top line winger for either the Kulich or Norris line. And so that way you could, you're kind of balancing like Peterka, Benson, Tuck, and one more guy. And I think you could get out, you could be onto something there. Whether that's a free agency or trade, I think you're probably going to have more luck in the trade market, but there's some, everyone wants to talk about Mitch Marner. I don't think it's that realistic, but it's sure fun to talk about.
Yeah.
But he'd be a hell of an addition, but they're probably going to have more luck in the trade market at the forward group. But to give you the spark notes: top six forward, two defensemen, backup goalie. Those are like the big four shopping list for me if I'm a Sabres GM.
I think the biggest takeaways you could have from the season going forward, and you certainly hit on two of the three for sure, is one, Byron's probably not worth a big long-term contract, and maybe that's the reason why you gave him a look playing with other guys. Unless you're going to play with Darlene every game for the next 5 years, then I don't know. That's a big takeaway. I think maybe one of the most disappointing things about the Sabres, and there was plenty to be disappointed about, is I think UPL 2 years ago really looked the part. He got a 5-year deal. This year, he doesn't look to me like a guy who you could trust to play 60 to 65 games in net. He didn't show you that this year, that's for sure. Very, very shaky, and that really accelerates the need. If UPL would have been that guy this year too, and he really built off 2 years ago, then maybe you do have Levi up to start the year, because you could count on UPL giving you 60 to 65 games, and maybe Levi gets you 15 to 20 or whatever. But I agree with you fully. You got to get a guy, and I'm assuming even if he comes back, it would be an upgrade over James Reimer. And then the other thing, which we really didn't talk about, is I'm sure you're looking to get a couple of assistants for Lindy, because the power play sucked. Special teams was not good. And that was probably the 13-game winless streak, in which this played a factor in that. But obviously that's the biggest reason why the Sabres missed the postseason. But you could just look at the 82-game schedule and say special teams, for the most part, was a disaster as well. How do we get better at special teams going forward? That's a big deal too, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. How they handle these assistant coaches is going to be super fascinating. I kind of assume that that's going to, if they make an announcement on Adams, that would come with it, I would think.
Yeah.
Even though they're kind of different, coaching staff versus front office, but still a hockey operations thing. So it wouldn't shock me if they're like, Sabres announced hockey operations changes. Kevin Adams is a new title. Karmanos is promoted. And, oh, by the way, Marty Wilford's not coming back. If it's up to me, I think all the coaches would be gone. Keep Lindy, fine, do what you will. Mike Sullivan on the market, I'd throw a pile of cash at that dude. But if Lindy's got to stay, if we're assuming Lindy's protected, and I think that's a fair assumption, I wouldn't bring Eipert back. His power play stunk. His power play wasn't good in Rochester. It wasn't good here either. I don't know why you would want to why you want to see him again. But like Wilford moving on makes sense. I think you can make a really good case to move on from Mike Bales, the goalie coach, as well. And so, if the power play and special teams were really, really bad. I'm sorry, penalty kill. And the power play was more noticeable just because they couldn't get in the zone, couldn't get set up. But honestly, a 5% improvement on their penalty kill would be a huge difference maker.
Mm-hmm.
And I, they were in like 74% or something like that this year. That's atrocious. Like you got to get above 80. You got to get above 80. Cause I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's some like formula out there where you can effectively say, if your special teams can operate at 100% combined, 20% power play, 80% penalty kill, you're going to be in decent shape. 12% power play, whatever the hell it was, and a 74% power penalty kill are not going to get it done for you.
Yeah.
So I think Wilford probably falls on the sword for him a little bit when you look at the penalty kill and just the decor in general being meh, like kind of so. And that would be a change, right? Just like they moved Ellis off the bench and they got Ellis off of a direct on the bench coaching role. I think I would expect a similar thing to happen with Wilford and maybe Bales, and maybe they let Lindy pick one of his own guys this time around.
Last thing here, we'll end today. Well, I want to circle back to the beginning because now Bulldog from WGR put up a tweet, which again, I don't think there's a wrong. There's, I think both sides are right. Bulldog goes, he tweets, for me, the organization's actions and words, trading for Cooper, bluntly stating that they needed Coleman and Kincaid to dig in and do more next season, drove the desire for another wide receiver. To my ears, it sounded like the Bills themselves telling us that they don't have enough. I agree with that. I think that's right. I think that's absolutely spot on. We're up against time here. Before we get out, we've gotten a lot of new watchers and listeners through this draft, especially the last week or so. So for some people anyway, especially if they're not big Sabre guys, this is kind of their introduction here to Chris. Tell people briefly about the blog that you have and the podcast as well, because if you don't know, man, Chris, and I legitimately mean this, is one of the very best content creators in this content creation community, especially when it comes to the Sabres. But tell people out there about the blog and about the podcast.
Yeah, blog is twointhebox.com. Been going at it for way longer than I care to admit. Too many non-playoffs years, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But the blog is primarily Sabres focused. I'll throw an Odd Bills article up there from time to time. Also, we'll throw some like Buffalo development stories up there. It's like the thing something I'm like really interested, like passionate about is just like the growth of the city. So if you go on the site, you'll see like I got an article up about like the cruise ship terminal, for example. So don't think that you're in the wrong spot. I mix it up from time to time. And then the podcast, so the Instigator podcast, again, primarily Sabres focused. Again, from time to time, I'll mix like in a Buffalo kind of development sort of thing if I get the right guest. But yeah, the Instigator podcast, twointhebox.com, and then on Twitter and Blue Sky, it's 2ITB. Well, no underscores on Blue Sky, if I'm not mistaken, but 2ITB_Buffalo on Twitter and or X, depending on your parlance. But yeah, it's that's where you can find me. It's I try to get articles up as often as I can, but I'm not always as good about it as when I was in my 20s. So
yeah, well, you're one of the best, man. I really do, and I appreciate you coming on this show. Thanks, Chris. All right, guys, I will be back tomorrow. Matt Warren from SB Nation joins me. Talk to you then.